The year 1490 stands as a monumental dividing line in human history, marking not just the discovery of new lands, but the unintentional unleashing of a biological revolution. When Christopher Columbus's ships connected the isolated continents of the Americas with the vast Afro-Eurasian landmass, they initiated a biological, ecological, and cultural phenomenon known as the Columbian Exchange. This was an unprecedented and often unintended transfer of living things, plants, animals, microbes, and people, between the Old World, Europe, Asia, Africa, and the New World, the Americas. Far more than just trade, it was a fundamental reshaping of global ecosystems, human diets, economies, demographics, with profound and lasting impacts that resonate to this very day. But what specific elements crossed this vast oceanic divide, and what were the immediate and long-term consequences of this biological handshake across continents? The flow of life from the Old World to the New World initiated a transformative cascade. European explorers, driven by a quest for wealth and new territories, brought with them a flood of familiar species that would utterly redefine the American landscape and its societies. Perhaps the most impactful animal introduction was the horse. Native Americans had no horses before Columbus. The introduction of horses by the Spanish revolutionized transportation, hunting, especially buffalo on the Great Plains, and warfare for many indigenous groups, particularly those on the plains. They became central to numerous Native American cultures, vastly increasing mobility and efficiency. Along with horses, Europeans brought other crucial livestock: cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats. Cattle provided meat, milk, and hides, transforming economies and diets. Pigs, being prolific and adaptable, quickly established feral populations, often becoming a vital food source for colonists but also competing with native wildlife. Sheep and goats provided wool, meat, and milk. These animals not only served as new food sources and valuable commodities, but also provided labor, traction for plows, and overland transportation, fundamentally changing agricultural practices and trade in the Americas. In terms of plants, European settlers brought their staple crops that were essential for their survival and familiar diets. Wheat, barley, oats, and rice were introduced and cultivated, allowing Europeans to sustain themselves with familiar foods in the new environment. More significantly, cash crops like sugar cane and coffee were introduced from the Old World to the New. The cultivation of these highly lucrative crops in the Americas, particularly in the Caribbean and parts of South America, fueled a massive demand for labor which tragically led to the forced migration and enslavement of millions of Africans, creating the transatlantic slave trade. Other introductions included various fruits: apples, peaches, pears, citrus, grapes for wine, and olives. These crops altered agricultural landscapes and introduced new flavors and nutritional sources. Beyond living organisms, Europeans also brought their technology and ideas. Iron tools, wheeled vehicles though not initially widely adopted by Native Americans, firearms, writing systems, legal concepts, and, critically, Christianity, were all part of this one-way exchange, profoundly influencing the development of colonial societies and interacting with indigenous cultures. The exchange was not entirely one-sided. The New World, in turn, offered a revolutionary bounty of crops to the Old World, fundamentally altering diets, increasing populations, and transforming agricultural practices across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Among the most impactful were the big for staple crops: potatoes. Originating in the Andes, the potato proved incredibly adaptable to European climates, especially in northern regions. Calorie-dense and easy to grow, it became a fundamental staple, contributing significantly to a rapid population boom across Europe, Asia, and Africa by providing a new reliable and highly nutritious food source that could feed more people from less land. Maize corn, highly versatile, maize spread rapidly across Europe, Africa, and Asia. While often used as animal feed in Europe, it became a crucial human staple in parts of Africa, especially after being introduced by Portuguese traders. Tomatoes, initially feared in Europe as poisonous due to their belonging to the nightshade family, tomatoes eventually became a cornerstone of Italian, Spanish, and French cuisine, utterly transforming culinary traditions. Chili peppers, introduced from Central and South America, chili peppers revolutionized cuisines across the globe, becoming essential ingredients in dishes from India to Thailand, Mexico to Hungary. Other significant New World staple crops included squash, beans, peanuts, sweet potatoes, and manioc tapioca, all of which provided new, resilient, and calorie-rich additions to global diets. Beyond staples, the Americas gifted the Old World with highly valuable luxury and cash crops. Tobacco rapidly became an incredibly popular and addictive commodity globally, driving vast plantation economies in the Americas and creating immense wealth for European powers. Its cultivation, however, was heavily reliant on slave labor. Cacao chocolate, initially consumed as a bitter beverage in Mesoamerica, chocolate was transformed in Europe into a sweetened luxury, becoming a global indulgence. Vanilla, used as a flavoring agent, it quickly became prized in European cooking and confectionaries. Other notable New World contributions included rubber vital for industrialization, quinine the only effective treatment for malaria, transforming European colonization of tropical regions, avocados, pineapples, and turkeys. While the exchange of plants and animals brought immense benefits and transformations, the most devastating aspect of the Columbian Exchange was the unintended transfer of diseases from the Old World to the New World. Eurasia and Africa, having been connected for millennia, had developed shared pathogen pools. Populations there had built up some degree of immunity to diseases like smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus, bubonic plague, diphtheria, malaria, and whooping cough. Native American populations, however, had been isolated for thousands of years. They had no prior exposure to these old world diseases and, consequently, possessed no natural immunity. When these pathogens arrived with European explorers and colonists, the results were catastrophic. The lack of immunity led to epidemics of unparalleled scale, often preceding direct European contact. Entire villages and communities were wiped out, with mortality rates estimated to be as high as 50 to 90% of the indigenous population in many regions within decades of contact. This demographic collapse facilitated European conquest by severely weakening indigenous resistance and creating vast tracts of depopulated land. The impact was so profound that it led to what some historians call the Great Dying, a demographic catastrophe that fundamentally altered the human landscape of the Americas. The flow of diseases was largely one way, but not entirely. The most prominent candidate for a New World disease transmitted to the Old World is syphilis. While its exact origin is debated among scholars, there is significant evidence suggesting it originated in the Americas and spread to Europe after Columbus's return. The Columbian Exchange also brought about massive environmental and ecological transformations across both hemispheres, often with unintended consequences. In the Americas, the introduction of Old World plants and animals led to profound landscape changes. European agricultural practices, including plowing and the introduction of new crops like wheat, drastically altered native ecosystems. Invasive species, like European weeds and grasses, outcompeted native flora. The large-scale introduction of grazing animals such as cattle and sheep had a particularly significant impact. Their grazing habits altered vegetation patterns, compacted soils, and contributed to erosion in many areas. Their sheer numbers often overwhelmed native animal populations and food sources. This exchange led to a process of ecological homogenization, where the same species of plants and animals began to appear across continents. While increasing agricultural output in some areas, it also resulted in a loss of biodiversity in native ecosystems. The demographic and economic consequences of the Columbian Exchange were equally monumental and laid the groundwork for the modern global economy. The introduction of calorie-rich New World crops like the potato and maize contributed significantly to global population growth, particularly in Afro-Eurasia, by providing more abundant and reliable food sources. However, in the Americas, the massive demographic collapse of Native American populations due to disease created a severe labor shortage for the newly established European colonies, particularly for labor-intensive cash crops like sugar and tobacco. This labor vacuum directly fueled the brutal transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic to the Americas to work on plantations, creating an enduring legacy of suffering and racial inequality that continues to shape societies. In the Americas today, the immense wealth generated by New World silver, gold, and cash crops, often produced through exploitative labor systems, dramatically accelerated the rise of European nations as global powers. This wealth-fueled capital accumulation financed further exploration and empire building, and fundamentally shifted the balance of global economic power towards Europe, laying foundations for global capitalism. The long-term legacy of the Columbian Exchange is pervasive and undeniable. Our modern food systems are a direct result of this exchange. It is difficult to imagine Italian cuisine without tomatoes, Irish diets without potatoes, or Indian food without chili peppers, yet all these ingredients originated in the Americas. Our daily meals are a living testament to this global biological mingling, the homogenization of the world biota continues, with fewer distinct ecological zones and more widespread species across continents, impacting biodiversity to this day. The historical economic structures, cultural identities, and even racial dynamics of many modern societies, particularly in the Americas, were profoundly shaped by the demographic shifts and forced migrations initiated by the exchange. While the most dramatic phase occurred centuries ago, the Columbian Exchange reminds us that the world is a single interconnected biological system where the movement of living things, whether intentional or not, can have consequences that reverberate for centuries, continuing to shape our world.